Welcome to Psychology Ninjas. Today we're tackling individual differences in prejudice, and this just focuses on personality, unlike obedience. So it's really clear straight from the off that we have these differences in our command words in our different areas of our course. Okay, so when we're talking about personality then, how are we going to explain this? Well, we're viewing personality as a theory, as an explanation of why people are prejudicial. Therefore, we're going to be talking about those key terms associated with prejudice, and that's our different personality types. Okay, so it breaks down into four main personality types that we want to talk about. We've got some balance in here already because we've got generalised tolerant, and that is how we might be less prejudicial rather than more prejudicial. It's really important that we focus on how prejudice is the outcome or the behaviour that is the result of this personality type, rather than anything else. And that's particularly important in right-wing authoritarianism and authoritarian personality because you've already tackled those in terms of obedience. Here, what we also want to do is front load this with social dominance orientation because that's one specifically for prejudice. Okay, so how are we going to tackle this in terms of evaluation? Well, as we said, this is a theory and therefore we're going to focus on SODA as our way of explaining and evaluating this particular theory. When we're creating our arguments, what we want to be doing is ensuring that we're signposting to the examiner that we are evaluating. So a strength of individual differences in prejudice is research support. And then explain Coors et al.'s research, focusing on the findings specifically. So you don't need to have a lot of information about what Coors et al. Did, and you may well have that if this is your contemporary study. You want to focus on the specific findings and how that supports this positive correlation between prejudice and personality. We're going to give a counter argument to show those logical chains of reasoning, and we're going to talk about how correlation does not equal causation. And that's a big one with correlational methods. And particularly here, what we might talk about is curvilinear relationships and that other things might be having an impact. And we're going to give a specific extraneous variable. And in this case, I've talked about situation. And that is competition and resource stress and how that might have an explanation on both the prejudice and the personality. Finally, you're going to give a mini conclusion. Okay, and that's about linking back to the question, but also saying why this is important. So if we think about mapping this out in relation to this exam question, evaluate individual differences as an explanation of prejudice, 8 marks. So once again, we can see how we've put the two bits of knowledge that we've already gained from today's video together. We're going to start by explaining right-wing authoritarianism using all that key terminology that's involved with that. So authoritarian aggression, authoritarian submission, conventionalism, and then go into our strength, which is our research support. Okay, moving through then, we're then going to talk about social dominance orientation. We're going to say this lacks external reliability because we've got inconsistent findings. Okay. And therefore, we're talking about two different pieces of research here, or two different oppositions to prejudice. First one comes from Lewis et al. And that these scales, these questionnaires, do not include items that are affected by social norms. And therefore, that skews the results because of the phrasing of the questions in the questionnaire. Then we're going to use Levin et al.'s research. And here we're going to talk about how personality is not consistent over time and that different personality traits might be shown if we're using test-retest. Therefore, we're going to say that extraneous variables are significant in explaining prejudice. Moving through then, we're going to explain authoritarian personality, but we're going to be saying that this is a reductionist account. And rather than situation that we've already talked about, we're going to be talking about culture as a factor that affects prejudice. And this will come up again when we're looking at this as a topic in itself. And we're going to be using research here to support this from Rotherall. We're going to say this has an effect on the validity or the accuracy of personality as an explanation of prejudice because other factors need to be taken into account. Our final bit is to talk about generalised tolerant, and this is our personality type that is reduced in terms of its prejudicial behaviours and how we might apply this to reducing prejudice. Exposing people to a specific worldview is problematic and creates prejudicial behaviour, and we could talk about role models and social learning here to show our wider and broader knowledge. And we're going to use that with greater regulation of media resources. You might talk about school twinning here, so your school being connected to a specific school in a different country, or international exchange programs where we're exposing people to a wider range of viewpoints. Where we have application and can apply this successfully, that is showing credibility for this explanation or factor in prejudice. Okay, so how might we link this to a different exam question then? Same information, same table. We've got explain one strength and one weakness of personality as a factor in prejudice. So for 4 marks then, we need to make sure that we're identifying a specific strength and then justifying it. So we're identifying there is research support for personality, justifying it with cause-et-al's research, and ensuring that we give those specific findings to show our knowledge. We're going to stay in this row to actually give our weakness, and that it lacks reliability because we can talk about the fact that it's correlational research. You could talk about it that it lacks external reliability because of Lewis et al.'s research, or Levin, which is underneath. So it's entirely up to you how you construct your weakness, and there's lots of different options there. Okay, let's have a look at this in relation to another exam question. Here we have a STEM question, and this one's actually 16 marks because we're talking about this in terms of different themes that might explain a behaviour in paper 3. So we've got our command word, to what extent, and it's important that we know that this is asking us to give a final judgment overall, and therefore we want to be having that judgment in relation to that link and mini conclusions. We know here that we need to link personality to Karen and Karen's idea. So she's gone to a match at a local netball team, and then we're seeing different prejudicial views, and she's wondering whether this is due to personality. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, we're changing this slightly, but we're keeping a lot of the information the same. All right, we've still got, and I've condensed this down a little bit because we've already talked about this once before. So where we're talking about our different personality types, we then want to be giving a link back specifically to apply these personality types to our scenario of Karen and her netball team and seeing these prejudicial views in the netball team. We're also going to put this AO2 and this link and application in our evaluation as well. So therefore, what we're saying here is we were linked in the situational factor specifically to netball teams as well. As we move through this, we want to do this consistently in terms of applying both our knowledge and our application, tailoring both to that STEM to show thorough and detailed knowledge. Okay, let's have a look at a second exam question. Here we've got Trey has recently moved from London to Okay, let's have a look at a second exam question here. So we've got Trey has recently moved from London to Berlin. Okay, here's our second exam question. Trey has recently moved from London. Here's our second exam question. Trey has moved to London from Berlin, and he's noticed that the level of prejudice is consistent between the two cities. So this is the focus for our STEM. Here, our command word is discuss. So within a discuss question, we need to explain those individual differences and link them back to Trey's experience. So we're only being assessed on our knowledge and application, and therefore our application, we need to have 8 different separate application ideas in order to secure the marks, ensuring that they're as detailed as enough and can only be applied to this particular STEM. Okay, so here we have our AO1, which is explaining those different personality types. And then we've got different examples as we move through. So we're doing one explanation, right-wing authoritarianism, and here are how those different worldviews, those different ideas in terms of authoritarian submission, aggression and conventionalism link specifically into those two cities. The same is also true for social dominance orientation. And again, we might want to give some specific examples in how those might link in to London and Berlin. You may also want to focus on the fact that these are national cities, that they're capitals, and therefore might be encouraging political power in terms of social dominance orientation. You also want to give some examples about how the personality types may be less likely to be prejudicial and how they might demonstrate, or individuals in those cities might demonstrate, a generalised tolerant viewpoint. Thanks for joining us today here at Psychology Ninjas. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell. See you next time.